everyone. Welcome to Reading, Writing, and Ralph in March. Tonight, we will be speaking with journalist Michael Williams, who authored an article in 2020 about Charles Howell and Tiger. Excuse me. It has been a long day. So Charles Howell and Tiger, the golf star, an article that sparked an open and frank discussion on a tough topic. So it's an article. There's no book to give away. Tonight's trivia prize, though, will be free zebra golf caps. So first, before we get to that, I want to thank our sponsors, the Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love Fund. So Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love Fund was founded by Ed Arthur to honor his parents, Eddie and Kathleen, some of the most generous people in Alexandria. This fund stands as a way to ensure they can continue to give back to their community now that they are gone. The fund has dispersed almost $100,000 to citizens in need since its inception in 2019. And this includes providing rents as well as other day-to-day expenses. So they are now supporting the domestic violence safe house in assisting women and children, providing safety and security to them as they leave that secured house. So please consider this worthy cause by donating, and I will pop the link up in the comments. All right, so now we've thanked our lovely sponsors. I am going to welcome Ralph. Hello, Ralph. I am glad to have you back. How are you?
Great, Grace. How are you doing today?
I am good. Been a good Tuesday. The warm weather was nice this weekend. I hope you got outside.
I sure did, and I still got out today, even though it was quite windy and about 20 degrees colder than yesterday.
Yeah.
But I was able to get out and play some golf. And tonight we have an interesting guest, Michael Williams. He has quite a varied background. He's a journalist. He has been a sports writer. He does management consulting, and he's just done a lot of neat things. And he covered a PGA event for ESPN, and he managed to come away with an interesting story. And so it'd be good to have him on and hear all about himself and the story. It's a tough topic, but we'll go at it with all due candor.
Yeah, I find these conversations fascinating. It is a controversial topic, a tough topic, and I am sure you two will discuss it with Grace. So I will let you and Michael take it away.
Sure, Grace. Anytime you want to come on. Good evening, Michael. How are you?
I'm wonderful, bro. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
You're welcome. You're welcome. As I said, it's a tough topic. It's always going to be a tough topic until everybody comes to grips with where we are. But as always, I like the audience to get familiar with you. So it's a good chance for you to talk about your background. You've done a lot of things. You've been a radio host. You're a writer. You in the USGA editorial columnist. So you've done wonderful things, and you've also met the Dalai Lama and Mike Tyson. Okay, so who was more entertaining?
That's a tough one. More entertaining. I mean, given the fact that represents probably the two ends of the universe, everything sort of fits between the fence that's delineated by the Dalai Lama and Mike Tyson, right? The Dalai Lama actually has a good sense of humor. He's an easy laugh. You know? He's always like sort of cracking jokes and has sort of like a giggle for a laugh. He's just a very interesting. I think he'd be sort of this pious type of person, but he's far from it. And I always said that Mike Tyson is a person just who is more literate than you would expect. He uses words in conversation that you would never expect to use. Like he'll just go out with his Michael. I met this guy the other day, and he was just kind of a dilettante. You know, it's like what dilettante? Where does that come from? He's just a fascinating person. But I know I find both of those people fascinating. But I think one of the things that, whether it's natural to me or something I learned from somewhere, I like to find that fascinating thing about almost everybody you meet. Everybody has that thing within them if you allow them to show it.
Yes. I think you're right on that. That's very well said. Um, so tell us about your background. Where you are in life. What do you do? What are the things you like to do? I know you like to play golf, but start with your career, your education, where you lived.
Sure. I was gonna tell a bad joke. My background is like the last wood paneling in America, but actually, my personal background is born and raised in Washington D.C., native Washingtonian. Grew up in Northwest D.C. Um, Two brothers, one sister. The four of us grew up here. My dad was a career State Department guy. 49 years in State Department. He was one of the people who helped start the EEO department across the federal government. When he retired, they joked that his retirement party, that first boss at State was Thomas Jefferson. He was almost there that long. He just a guy who sort of committed to. He and my mother came to the segregated South Carolina. They came north on the same train on the same day, not together, just on the same day, both trying to escape what would be a very limited possibility in South Carolina, during that early part of their lives, in the middle of the 20th century. And they made a good life for themselves and a good life for us. I started reading when I'm told, just around between 2 and 3 years old. I started reading, and by the time I got to preschool, I was reading to the class, and the head of the school thought that maybe I ought to look at another school besides the one that was the neighborhood school, and I was admitted to Sidwell Friends for kindergarten, and I was a lifer there. I went K through 12 at Sidwell Friends, and it was an amazing, awesome experience. I still feel very close to the school. Um, I have my mug right here, as you can see. Yeah.
That's a
Um,
very prestigious school.
it is. And I would say when you're inside the school, you don't feel that way. I was going to school with kids who were diplomats and bankers and the sons and daughters of famous and important people. But to me, they were just my classmates. The kids who you take tests with and you play games with, and it was all great. But it was interesting because I would go to maybe I get invited over to for a play day or to spend the night at a friend's house, and it was a friend who would have a maid or a house servant who was African American, and I didn't realize until later, but the look on their faces, when they would see a young black child coming into the home, and it's sort of a look of surprise and a look of like pride, in a way. Wow, this is really happening. These guys are inviting you to come spend the night. Maybe things are going better, but I didn't grow up with that sense of race. We didn't see it. I know that's a very trite and cliche kind of thing to say, but we didn't grow up with that sort of thing. I would hear other people talk about, well, I would say my friends' names, and they would say, well, this guy's Italian or this guy's Jewish, and I'm like, how do you know that? What? How do you know? We didn't even have that sense that names told you anything about a person. It's just a person.
Right.
There were 84 of us, I think, in our graduating class, and 23 of us were together since kindergarten, and that's still like my extended family. So, went to college, studied English literature, was kind of an entrepreneur. Eventually, went overseas. My first job was actually working with the guy who did invent the internet, a guy named Vince Cerf. So, got to know the internet really, really well from the ground up. Went overseas for foreign exchange banking, got a gig there, and I lived in Hong Kong for 5 years, Vienna for 5 years, London for two, doing foreign exchange banking and communications consulting. And then I came back to the States. It was during that period when I came back to the States that I got into golf, because you'll notice that golf is missing from that whole description. Didn't play golf growing up, was never on a golf course, none of it. Didn't really touch a golf club until I was 37, 38 years old. So that brings us up to the golf course period. Any questions there? I'll give you a chance to talk. Any questions so far on that one?
It's kind of interesting you brought up Vince Cerf. I worked with Vince Cerf at MCI back in I guess it was the early 80s. And so it's funny how people's paths cross and we don't even realize it. But, you bring up the point, and I've seen it in neighborhoods I moved into, uh, where you invite a person of color over to your house, and the next door neighbors look at you like, "Oh wow, what's going on over there?" And to me, I grew up in the Bronx, and it was as you can imagine, there were some neighborhoods that were white, and some neighborhoods that were black, and some neighborhoods that were Italian, and some neighborhoods where everything crossed over. And especially when you do sports, you kind of lose everybody's color, right?
Mhm.
Except for the color you're playing for. And that's what you're taught, and that's what you're instilled. And maybe that helps people go through life with a different perspective. Now we can't obviously we don't go through the same perspective as you do. So as you moved away from school and got into the working world, what, if anything, changed in how you viewed things or how you were being viewed?
Nothing really, nothing changed for me and
Well,
how
that's
I
good.
how I view the world. I mean, as you get into the world, you will encounter people who don't necessarily have as broad an outlook as you. They haven't had the benefit of
Right.
being around a variety of people, of having a variety of experiences, and that's just fine. So certainly there are ignorant things that get said, but I chalk it up mostly to ignorance rather than being malevolent. Um, you would have people who would tell in Hong Kong, you have British guys who would tell, you know, jokes like ethnic jokes, and they would tell them in the room, and it's like, hey, we're just kidding. And it's like, well,
Right.
I get that. Guess you're kidding. Doesn't make it right. And so they get a chance, you get an opportunity to sort of educate people and expand their experience. And that's what kind of segue thing with the experience, the thing that I had with Charles, the encounter that I had with Charles Howell, is my belief that when those things happen, my first instinct is to try to instruct, to really try to make it a teachable moment rather than punish people for doing or saying the wrong thing. I try to. Then there's sometimes where there needs to be a rebuke. But my first instinct is to take it as a teachable moment.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to describe the Howell situation, what happened. But first, I'm going to give our viewers the first trivia question. So we have two
Sure.
trivia questions tonight. Um, and since Michael is a journalist, and we could give away newspapers, but we're going to give away golf caps to stay on theme. So we get a zebra golf cap for the first person to write in the correct answer. You just type it in the comments section online. And the first question is, who is credited with breaking the color barrier for women on the USGA circuit? So that includes amateurs. So who is the first woman of color to play on the USGA amateur circuit? So the first one in with the correct answer gets a zebra golf cap. So now frame it for us. Describe where you were, what the situation was, and how this came about with Charles Howe and with Tiger Woods. So,
Okay. I'll reach way back and very quickly bring you to how I
yes.
got to that place. I started working in the golf industry uh, in the year 2000 or so. I got a job with a magazine after I came back from overseas. I had a bad year in the family. My oldest brother passed away very early. Mom and dad, a bunch of relatives got sick. So I took a year off just to help take care of family. And when I got back into the workplace, I needed something that was flexible. And I started working with a golf magazine, one of whose clients was the three golf courses here in Washington, D.C., East Potomac, Langston, and Rock Creek. Uh, Consulted for them for a couple of months and then brought me on for a marketing role, marketing and communications. And I ended up staying there for 7 years, which is a record that will never be broken. So, um, I gradually segued from the management side into journalism, which is sort of my natural thing, journalism and communications, working with CBS Radio, ESPN, PGA.com, and so forth. So I fast forward to 2019, U.S. Opens at Pebble Beach. And it's the 100th anniversary of Pebble Beach. Again, one of the most famous courses in the world, beautiful place. The U.S. Open's there. It's going to be a magical week. And I was being hosted by Lexus as a sponsor, who was the sponsor of the event. And partially as a journalist, but mostly to come and experience Lexus products and their hospitality and that sort of thing. So they had players who were under their banner, and they were doing post-round interviews with them. So after the first round, the Thursday, first round of the U.S. Open, there's an interview with Patrick Cantlay and Charles Howell III. Now, for those who don't know, Charles Howell III is a guy who's been on tour for just over 20 years, has made just north of $40 million in his career. He's had 3 wins, never a major, but he's one of those guys who's always around, always making money, always doing well, always in the mix. So he's had a really good career, especially since he's a little tiny guy. He's about 5'7", about 140 pounds, has to run around the shower to get wet. He's one of those guys. So Charles is being interviewed by Todd Lewis of the Golf Channel, and they're sort of telling stories and that sort of thing. Now, this is a small room. There's only about 70, 75 people in here, and most of them are people who are invited by Lexus, their sponsors and their dealers, favorite customers, that sort of thing. And me, I'm there, and the only journalist in the room. So at some point, Todd cues up this story for Charles Howell. The audience, he asked, do you all remember when Tiger ran into the fire hydrant in Isleworth? And everybody,
Yes.
Yeah, but why are we talking about that now? It's over a decade ago. He says, well, Charles was living there at the time, and he thought it would be funny to play a joke on all the reporters who had descended on this little town in Florida. And Charles proceeds to take over the story, and he said that he thought it would be funny if he were to, quote, go into the house and put on all the shoe polish and other dark stuff I could find on my face, put on a black wig, and get into another SUV with a blonde and drive around and pretend to be Tiger. Interesting sort of coincidence is that this was about a week, maybe 2 weeks after Ralph Northam's picture of him in blackface had been found in his high school year or college year or whatever it was, and he was on the verge of resigning the governorship because of this type of thing with the blackface. So I'm sitting about 15 feet away from Charles telling this story, and I have to move to the back of the room because I'm so shocked and appalled by what he's saying. It's just completely out of the blue. Now, my dilemma was, I am a reporter and I'm a human being, who objects to this thing, but I'm also a guest of Lexus, and I don't want to blow up the event. I don't want to blow up this room. It's their event. So I decided I'm going to let Charles get to the end of the event and let people in the room ask questions. And when he made the comment, there was some, I would say, some nervous laughter, but there wasn't any objection. No one said, wow, I can't, there wasn't that feeling that he had done something wrong. He got to the end of the Q&A, and I got the sense from nobody else was going to raise their hand. I raised my hand and said, Charles, I just wanted to give you a comment and Ashley a request. My comment was that I was an admirer of him in his career, won a lot of money, done very, very well, especially with all the cute, big physical bombers that are coming out on tour now. So well done on that thing. My request is that you never tell this story again, because you could blow up your career with this thing in less than the time it takes to tell that story. It's ignorant, it's offensive, and I think it's beneath you. I don't know you, but I think it's beneath you. And his response was, you could see the shocked look on his face. And his response was, I'm sorry if you were offended, which is something that sets me off even more. That's not an apology. That's an explanation.
Yeah. Now Charles Howell is also a pretty religious man, from what I remember.
He is.
He's got a strong faith. Yeah. So
he is. He's a spiritual guy, and well, others in the room quickly realized what was happening. People from the USGA, people from Lexus understood what was potentially happening here. They got him to shake hands with me afterwards, before the room cleared, and he gave another apology, like, I'm sorry if you were offended. And they said, I'm sorry that I am offended. Anyone should be offended. I'm sorry that you said it. You don't understand why it was the wrong thing to say. Not that you're sorry that I was offended. You should be sorry that you said it. Okay? And you could see again this look of puzzlement. Had some very deep discussions with the USGA, with Lexus, on what to do about this thing, because again, as a journalist, I'm thinking it's my duty to report this. This happened at the USGA. But also, I mean, be honest, I do love golf. I do love Pebble Beach. And the U.S. Open is my favorite tournament. It's Thursday, the U.S. Open. If this story comes out on Thursday, it blows up the entire event, right? That's it for the U.S. Open for the 100th anniversary. That's done. Also, it's again my nature to think that did this guy really mean it? Is this what he meant to do? People were assuring me that this isn't the person that he is. So I came to a decision in conjunction with the USGA. I talked to the USGA folks. And I said, look, with the devil on my shoulder telling me, hey, Michael, report this thing right now because you'll get 10,000 followers from 10,000 followers and $10,000 from TMZ. They'll take this on the first phone call because I had it recorded.
Right.
But I decided that I wasn't going to do that. I decided to try to get to know if the guy who said that, if that was really representative of the guy that he is / was. And I didn't tell, I pledged that I wouldn't tell anybody because again, there were no other reporters in the room, nobody else in the room. The PGA Tour came to me asking, it's like, we heard about this thing. Can you let us know who it was? I never told a soul. But I did get to know Charles over the course of that year. And that's what the story is about ultimately. It's not what happened in that room. It's what happened in the year between what happened in that room and an interview that I did a year later in North Carolina with him, where we talked for 5 hours and went over everything that happened in that. And it was, I think it was kind of life-changing for both.
He went through some sort of reflection period, and I think he went through some counseling after that event to kind of reflect on what happened. Is that your take? And did he come out stronger, I think, as a person after that?
Yeah, he did. He went through some counseling. As you said, he's a spiritual guy. So I believe once he had a realization of what the damage that he could have done to himself first, to his own career and reputation. But as a spiritual person, I think he had a recognition, he had an epiphany about what damage he could have done to another person who could have been truly, truly offended by what he said in that room. And it hit him like a ton of bricks. And he got counseling from his church. He went through a period of what he called sort of depression and reflection. But once he bounced up, he wanted to actively get to know more about the situation, about taking other people's point of view, understanding where these touch points are, where sensitivities are, because he's not different than most guys who are on the PGA Tour. All they've been doing is golf since they were 8 years old. It's a very limited circle. They don't meet many people. They know the same people from the time they're 8 to the time that they're 80. And so he's from Augusta, Georgia. He's grown up in a largely segregated South in a community that is even further segregated by the career that he chose. So it is not astounding, it's not astonishing that he would lack some sophistication in his social skills.
And the part of the outcome of this is you and Charles are good friends now.
We are very good friends. We are very good friends. At that meeting, in that room, we talked. We started off with a prayer because, like, the church is sort of my family business, on our side. And we started off with a prayer, and we talked for 5 hours about what we both thought, and where we grew up, and the things that we hadn't had a chance to talk about, in the room. And we reached such an understanding, and I had such a respect for him because there's no greater thing in my mind than that type of personal growth. None of us is born perfect. We don't come into this thing fully formed. But people who will take on a flaw that's been showed to them in their career and actively seek to remedy it, not only for their own benefit, but for the benefit of others, for whose lives they might touch and change. That is awesome. And he is doing a lot of work with diversity in golf, with a diversity tour that sort of nurtures African-American players onto the PGA Tour. He's given a lot of his time to that. In the meantime, and if I texted him now, he'd respond that, yes, sir, Mr. Williams. So great to hear from you. He's a wonderful guy, and I'm so glad that that's the story that I got to write. Is like a wonderful guy understanding how to be a good person.
Now, what's his relationship with Tiger like?
So he's friendly with Tiger. They aren't necessarily good friends. They had played together, as peers, but like most players on the PGA Tour, he looks at Tiger. He puts Tiger on a pedestal, and why wouldn't he? He's achieved things in that sport that nobody else has, and nobody else will. Um, but I think that he thought of Tiger as a friend at that time, and that's part of the reason that he didn't think of that being an offensive thing to do. Like Tiger would find this funny. Is I think that was his point of view. Tiger would get a laugh out of this, and Tiger is another guy who grew up in a mostly white atmosphere, playing golf and traveling the world and that sort of thing. He doesn't see himself, as any one particular ethnic group. He doesn't see himself in that way, and that's a good thing. In a way, I'm glad for that. But I think that's what led to him doing that thing, is because he thought that Tiger was a buddy who lives again in the same community, and yeah, Tiger will think this is funny, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. But again, it's not necessarily about what Tiger thinks when something like that is it really the right thing to do, not just who's going to get laughed at it.
Yeah. Let me come at this a little bit differently. And I'm not going to, there's no denying there's racism. There's no denying there's bigotry. And it's probably a certain percentage on both ends of the spectrum. But how much of the boomers, our era, baby boomers, have we lived with something that I'll call instilled irreverence, where we grew up making fun of everybody, right? Whether it was the Sicilians, whether it was the Irish, everybody, we made fun of everybody. How much of that kind of plays into things versus real racism?
Okay, interesting question, because I know exactly what you're talking about, where
Yeah,
everybody sort of makes fun of everybody else, and in a way, that's a celebration of who you are, that you're different. Not everybody is supposed to be the same. Everybody's
right.
different, and everybody's a little jacked up. So you can make jokes about those things being jacked up. I think obviously there are events that happen in news and society that accelerated these sensitivities.
Right.
You had the George Floyd incident, of course, obviously, which set off a tidal wave of events around the world that changed the sensitivity. Because if you could be murdered like that on TV publicly, what is that? That's a different type of thing. That exposed a different type of reality. But that reality had existed even during those times that we think of in cherished terms, like, everybody, was all good with everything. But there were still people who were getting murdered. There were cops who were murdering people, and just because we didn't have cell phone cameras or body cams, it didn't make the news. So both of those things were happening at the same time. We definitely have a changed perception now, and I think that that's a good thing. We should address these things, be sensitive to people, and see where we settle, see where we land. But if we have unfairness in the world, if we have true inequality, if we have a situation where one person can say something and it's laughed at, another person says that and you're fired. One person does something and it's a warning. The other person says something and he ends up dead. These are equalities that must be addressed in society. It has nothing to do with how we perceive each other. That's just honesty, truth.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make there. So, we've seen competitiveness throughout sports, and um, particularly, you look at things and you see different athletes respond different ways. Um, Babe Ruth, for example, um, inarguably the greatest baseball player of all time,
Did you say
and
inarguably?
inarguably, that's right.
I love
There's
it.
no argument about
We can do another show on that one. That's fine.
it. Yeah, all you gotta do is look at the stats and then roll in the fact that he stole home 10 times and won 94 games. So you got to match all that before you get that. So statistically, he's inarguably the greatest player of all time.
And I agree with you, by the way. I just like to argue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. I do too. And yeah, he risked his career and his relationship. Well, not that he really had a relationship with Kennesaw Mountain Landis, uh, playing and trying to get the Negro League players into baseball, right? And then at that same time, you have a guy like Ty Cobb, who's also in the Hall of Fame in the first class, in the first inaugural class, who was a Georgia boy and a racist. So how do you grapple with two athletes on pedestals in the same sport with such a different outlook? Right.
I think it's you could have those points of view in that universe of thinking and philosophy in virtually any walk of life that you could touch on, whether it's NFL players or astronauts. I mean, you could probably find a range of feeling on these types of issues because people are people. We have people have their own origin stories. They have their own experiences that inform them. Ty Cobb wasn't born out of a racist egg. I mean, he was taught to be that way. His experiences taught him that. He had a very different upbringing. He was the son. He was a very spoiled brat kid of a wealthy family. Ty Cobb. It's interesting. I know something about his background. And then you have um, Babe Ruth, who grew up in an orphanage in Baltimore. And there are some who say actually that he's an African American. That we don't know exactly where his parents are, but people will point and say that there's that argument that people make, and I'll leave that to other people to make. But clearly, Babe Ruth experiencing growing up in an atmosphere of deprivation and seeing people go without, do without, and have the hardest of lives without any discernible reason why. And then again, why am I being plucked out and singled out? Can I throw down a rope, for other people to help climb up to that level? That's what he grew up with. That informed his experience. So I guess what that teaches us, it's our job if we have an experience and an education and an outlook that allows us to let other people reach better levels in their lives and let other people reach a better level in their understanding, then it's our obligation to do so at every opportunity.
Wow, that's a good point. Good point. So what's next? Where do you go from here? What's the takeaways of your journey so far, and what's the messages you'd like to deliver to our viewers?
Well, for me, um, as you know, I'm doing the journalism with golf. I do journalism with politics as well. I host and moderate a show for Voice of America.
Right.
I work with Australian News as a DC correspondent. I'm also a consultant in the area of corporate communications, corporate culture, of course, DEI issues, work on a lot of those things. So for me, the where it goes from here is to continue to expand outward, to meet as many people as possible, to insert myself into as many instances as I possibly can, as many circumstances and lives and cultures, and find out what is in those cultures and in those individuals that can advance us as a whole, condense and maybe focus those things and show it to people, not as something like being virtuous shouldn't be your ticket to heaven. It should be your ticket to success. I'm always telling executives that DEI and doing the right things and having good, fair, honest practices, this isn't your ticket to heaven, your ticket to success. And so if we can get people to understand these things, absorb them into their own philosophy and their own strategic plan, the way they do things, well, that's a noble walk for me. I'd be satisfied with that.
Great. Great. That is a if you get all that done and help as many people as you can, you've lived a wonderful and charmed life, I tell you. I wish we could all say that. And anyway,
Yeah,
well,
can
it's
only
been a
try.
pleasure having you on, Michael, and good getting to know you a little bit. And maybe you'll write something else, and we can get you back on the show in the future. Um,
Well,
and,
well, I would love to come back on. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be at the Masters this year because the story about Charles Howell actually won a couple of awards. We won an award from the Golf Writers Association and
right.
Story of the Year for the National Association of Black Journalists. So yeah, as
Right.
soon as I get something that
Congratulations.
deserves ink, I'd be happy to come back on.
Congratulations. Good. Keep up the good work. It's always good. We need a lot of people out there. I think we're all a lot more similar than we are different. And
Amen to that.
we just have to understand each other. And great having you on, and look forward to speaking with you in the future. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ray. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, guys. So that was a great show. Wow, what a story. I loved hearing the ending to that. It was really interesting, juxtaposed with the beginning. Great ending, beautiful ending to that first encounter between Mike Williams and Charles Howell. You can find the article, A PGA Veteran's Callous Joke About Blackface and Tiger Woods Turned into a Lesson on Empathy. You can find it at anscape.com, and Michael Williams is, he's a man of many talents, and he is working in a lot of different places, so you can find him in other places than just that one website. So I will put the website for the article link in the comments. Ralph's next show is in 2 weeks, March 22nd. So until then, be the good news in someone's life.